introduce our next keynote speaker, who is Miss Amy Goff. Ms. Goff is the Training and Education Manager at Vinci Surgery for Device Technologies. She's been involved with teaching and training surgical technologies and minimal invasive surgery for about 18 years. She was the first intuitive surgical certified surgeon trainer in the Southern Hemisphere, and she's been instrumental in the local offering of courses and development of the first surgeon-led courses in Australia. Please welcome Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. We'll just share my screen with you.
Yep, we can hear you nice and clearly there.
Excellent. All right, can you just see my slides, David?
Yep, that's excellent.
Great, excellent. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. And just echoing from Jeffrey, I come to you from the land of the Wangal people here in Sydney. And thank you for that lovely introduction, David. As part of the theme for today of advancing your operative techniques, I would like to share with you the formal process that many consultants have undertaken when learning robotic surgery. Even if you aren't a robotic surgeon or never will be, I believe the principles are still applicable for anyone learning or teaching new skills. Like many of you, I too have made the transition in my career from open to laparoscopy, albeit in the veterinary field. And now, as an industry partner in Australia, the last 8 years being involved in the support of the Vinci surgical system. Being part of two surgical revolutions has taught me to be curious about everything, dismissive of nothing, and that learning new skills is never linear. Most of you are familiar with the Da Vinci system, so I'll just do a brief update on where we are today, and a few people have also mentioned it today. There have actually been 4 generations, and 90% of those systems across Australia and New Zealand are actually what we call Gen 4. Many of you know them as the X or the XI platforms. And the first robotic assisted case was performed in 1997 and in Australia in 2003. So we're due for a very big birthday party next year, I think. This year, there'll actually be more than 15,000 procedures completed across our region. And there are now 10 systems in public hospitals. The public systems have 2 surgeon consoles as well, which allows a consultant surgeon and a fellow or surgical trainee to participate in the operation with no priority to either system. When I reflect on learning curve models, I think the one that resonates me most is the Dunning-Kruger effect and an overlay of the conscious competence model. I've found that in any new skill acquisition, it follows a very predictable pattern, be it golf or anything you take up. And if you're prepared with the tools and a plan for the valley of despair, then success is high. It starts like this. First, you're super excited to learn something new, but then you don't know what you don't know. So off you go with all the enthusiasm, probably expensive gear, to climb what we call Mount Stupid. Then you become aware that your assumptions were just that, and you quickly fall into the valley of despair. This is the tough part, but it's part of the process. Anything that you do, those are those moments where you ask yourself, is this worth it? But if you're prepared in learning anything new with the why, then anyhow is possible. I'll now walk you through the formal map of the experienced surgeon traversing this course in Da Vinci surgery and the essential tools for success. Many of the things mentioned by Jeffrey in his previous talk. And if you're teaching or designing a curriculum, you can use the same principles to improve your success and eliminate sunk costs. Like any surgical procedure, development of robotic skills follows a progression of observing, assisting, mentorship, and then finally independent practice. And that's where you do that suspension of reality in those early phases. There are 2 defined ways to complete the technology training. One is via a fellowship, and the second is a post-fellowship adoption. Both are structured curriculums separated into 4 similar phases. But for the purpose of this presentation, we're just going to focus on experienced consultants. I will also use the abbreviation TTP occasionally, just for brevity. This is a technical training that involves mentors and proctors to provide clinical guidance and support. So industry partners and clinicians must work hand in hand with very clear goals and boundaries. The TTP curriculum was developed by Intuitive Surgical in partnership with experienced surgeons, and it's been regularly updated and changed based on feedback and success metrics. It's been adopted and recognized worldwide as the gold standard for technical certification, and it's specifically designed to make a rapid progression through the learning curve. I would say in my past 8 years working with the TTP, I've seen it change about 3 times, and every time for the better. So we go to phase 1, and in the beginning, the sole focus is that technical aspect of the system. I always tell my surgeons that my goal is to have them so comfortable on the system that when they perform their first cases, they're not thinking about the robot. They're thinking about the patient and the procedure. Now, I know it's not binary, and of course, there will be moments, but they should be a small part of the big picture. This includes taking phase 1, includes taking the test drive of the system to understand its capabilities, as well as observing a live Da Vinci procedure to understand how the system is applied clinically. Seeing a procedure video and then observing a live case will begin to enable you to see the choreography and the team dynamics that come with stepping away from the bedside and sitting at the console. Surgery is a team sport, and understanding how important communication and leadership are is an important part of success. This also allows them to see what an experienced team looks like and develop relationships. Many people will do their observations with their actual proctors. However, it's just as valuable to see multiple operators using the system. This is the skills simulator. This is part of a test drive and then also part of your phase 2 training coming next. So phase 2 has 2 main parts, and this is where you'll spend a decent amount of time. You've got your on-site and your off-site. On-site is about spending dedicated hands-on time learning about the system. You'll work at a hospital, usually with a product specialist, one of our team, on the simulator, as I showed you before, and many will spend at least 10 hours on the simulator before their basic training lab. However, the focus is on achieving 90% on most exercises. So it's a competency versus a time spent exercise. They'll also set up, dock, and use the robot and training instruments as if there were an actual procedure. Surgeons and assistants will work on tissue models and perform drills applicable to their specialty together. And here are a few of the exercises that we have as examples on the simulator. The simulation models are getting better and better every year. And I think it's only a matter of time before we will really be leaning on these opportunities. As you can see, now there's sort of a fundamentals of robotic surgery taken from what all of you have heard before, the fundamentals of laparoscopic surgery. So there are multiple curriculums to draw from, and this supports all of those. The objective of the offsite training is for surgeons and their patient side assistant to learn and practice robotic skills together. This is the consolidation phase of the previous activities. To accomplish this goal, all surgeons will complete a 1-day standardized basic training protocol, as the system skills required are the same regardless of specialty. And this is what most people will call your basic training lab. It actually begins with an intake assessment, and in order to receive a certificate, you must complete the protocol within that time allotted. The intake assessment is on instrument manipulation, port placement, docking, and suturing. And this course is run by a training specialist who undergoes yearly recertification and sometimes up to 6 months of training, depending on experience. Once that dry lab assessment is complete, the wet lab or tissue portion begin, allowing the surgeon and assistant to apply skills learned, practice their communication. And then once that patient cart is docked and instruments inserted, focus will be transitioning to the system skills required for intraoperative use. The finish of the day is spent reviewing emergency procedures and troubleshooting. And as David said before, I was one of the persons to start this training facility in Sydney. Prior to that, all of our surgeons had to go overseas to places like South Korea and California for training. So for the past 5 years, it's been an absolute dream to not have to go overseas to administer this training. So once you finish your basic training lab, Generally speaking, you're going to have cases immediately. And this initial case series plan aligns with your individual hospital's credentialing requirements. However, most have the same across the world. One of the most important decisions that you need to make is choosing a proctor. Hospitals and Intuitive will define a proctor as somebody who's done a minimum of 50 Da Vinci procedure cases. So this is going to be the mentor and the critical piece and the resource. There's actually now 324 local Da Vinci proctors in Australia and New Zealand, and an enormous amount of experience to draw upon locally. The second part of this initial phase is the supplement to the initial case series with other activities, so that you get through that learning curve quickly, and then you also, this is particularly important in those first 20 procedures that you supplement. If you aren't able to do a case, that you're able to supplement with other activities, right? Because you can't control what patient walks through the door. You can't control system access, and hey, COVID, nobody can schedule their cases in a perfect world. So if you can't do a case, there's other things to do. There's assisting in procedures, using the skills simulator. And then once you get through those 20 procedures, most of the research shows that you've gotten through the majority of the learning curve. After an initial series of cases have been completed, many surgeons have found it valuable to attend advanced trainings. Advanced trainings are run by experienced local faculty and focus on the actual clinical applications here. Many of the proctors and mentors now run local peer-to-peer events, and there's either a local or international event, I would say every week, and most are also recorded if they're out of our time zone, and we can watch them later. I also encourage you to record and review your procedures for debriefing, and also the possibility that you could become a famous mem one day, like they did surgery on a grave. All of your teenage children will know this one. In our increasing virtual world, it's never been easier to connect and learn from your peers. There's not only events for surgeons, but also every role within the Da Vinci program, from your nurse to your assistant to your executive leadership. This is an example of a recent webinar that was run by one of our most experienced anesthetists alongside with Professor Felix Chan while he was operating from start to finish. So it was a great event run that the entire team could watch and feel a part of. Also, we're all doing webinars now, here we are, virtual dinner meetings maybe, and nursing and anesthetic events also. My top tips for success, well, where I see people struggle the most is in that initial case series with case selection. Most surgeons take up robotic surgery for their complex cases, and there still is real peer pressure to do only complex cases on the robot. The problem with this is that it sets you and your team up for potential failure. This early phase is for building confidence, and the best way to do that is to start with home runs. You want to hit as many home runs as you can, and for those challenging cases, have additional support, have your mentors and your proctors. Just like if you're learning to sail, you don't start out with the Sydney to Hobart. Also, making sure that you get through the learning curve as quick as possible. You just need to go all in. Buy the golf clubs, get the membership, go every day that you can. All of those things. You want to just go all in on a new skill. We're all busy, and it's so easy to skip steps, especially when you're in that unconscious incompetence phase because you don't know what you don't know. With so many proctors locally and many overseas experts that are easily reached, it's becoming easier and easier to leverage everyone's experience. Remember, surgery is a team sport. We found actually when we were measuring, as we measure everything in the robot world, that if you actually brought your bedside assistant to your training lab, you are more likely to be successful by at least 1 or 2 procedures in the same time. There are even those defined training pathways. So the 4 phases, we actually have that for nurses, assistants, and fellows as well. And they're all located on the online community. So there's my favorite team for all of you.
Oh, I might switch you off there.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, we're not even playing game free, are we? And I would just like to thank you for having me.
Amy, thank you very much. I'd invite any questions people would ask, and 2 fascinating talks. I suppose one of the issues, you know, with me sort of taking up robotics was that you really have to go to ground zero again. You think you're a competent surgeon, you have to almost start from the scratch, and you really feel like you're in set one, or not in, you know, pre-training. What are the big inhibitors for people to go on with their training? You know, people dropping off training at that point, because, you know, those people who will persist will get there. What is stopping people at that early stage to keep on going with it?
I think if you, what I see people do that are successful is they sit down and they go through the whole plan first. You know, understanding the time commitment up front, that it's going to take 6 weeks to sort of get through things, and finding a mentor really quickly. Because I think if you find a colleague that's recently gone through it, they're going to have all of those pearls of wisdom to give you on the way through. And yes, there are definitely plenty of barriers to learning new things. And it's just being prepared, picking up the phone and asking a mate, oh, is this really worth it? And then getting them to
absolutely. The you know, one of the Professor Gananata sort of mentioned that the initial, with a lot of this technology, is the cost. You know, cost to the hospital, cost to the patient. You know, what have you found as that as a barrier? When
I would say, look, I've been around for 8 years, and in the beginning, it was an extreme barrier. Most hospitals in Australia at that time were actually charging the surgeons directly anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000 just to sit down at the console. But in that time, in the 10 years since I've sort of been paying attention, the cost questions have come down, the costs have come down themselves as well. So the barriers are just getting lower and lower. Excellent. And I would say there's now been a few studies and data done locally. Nepean Hospital just comes to mind because they were probably the last place I spoke to. They justified their robotic surgery program and teaching program because they took their bed day stays down significantly. I think they said it was down from 6 to 1.5. Yeah. So those tend to be the discussions we're having now.
Yeah, and this is a comment from Osama Majid, who's one of our general surgeons. Is there a move at the RACs for a certain baseline before commencement of sets, such as lab-based acquisition of certain skills before they enter, or the robotic stepwise program could serve as a model? I suppose that's more of a comment in general from the RAC's point of view, but you know, it's very much a stepwise process through the program that you're developed during that time.
I think it's becoming, because now we have systems at 10 public hospitals, and in many places, eventually more and more of these trainees are having access early, and they may not be able to sit on a console and operate, but many even early in their sets are spending time on the simulator and absolutely being involved in cases, even if it's just observation at their own local hospitals now. Excellent.
Look, Amy, I really appreciate your contribution to this day, and it's fantastic work supporting all of the training that you've done at your centre. Thank you very much.